Around the town with Taylor Brown. My friend Lisa was sad last night. Her Broncos gave Penrith a hell of a fright. Today we will talk about her team because this, our friends, is episode 13. Dean, what are you waving around there? Taylor, I'll get to you in a minute.
Unfortunately, I've got the little trophy here that's going to be out of reach for another year.
There's a rhyme. For those listening, Dean is wearing a Broncos shirt. I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else, to be quite frank with you. And
State of Origin Queensland shirt.
Yeah, true. Yeah. You were born in the Broncos one, I think. And he was waving around a replica of the NRL trophy, a small one. So if you do want to see Brisbane Broncos holding the Premiership trophy, please watch this on YouTube. Stop what you're doing now, listening to it on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple, or whatever it may be, and turn into a watcher on YouTube. Taylor Brown. Did you lose any hair or anything like that watching the game? Because you must have been pulling it out. I mean, I know you don't support the Broncos or the Panthers, but it certainly was the kind of game that got some emotions going.
Yeah, it was. It was a very. I said this for a long time in the lead up to the match. The real winner was always going to be rugby league. It was a great story that the Panthers won 3 in a row. It's a great story that not many teams have done it. They deserve their accolades. And if the Broncos managed to do it from where they finished last season and just the momentum behind them and the young side, that would have been a brilliant story as well. So in terms of how Peter V'landys viewed the game and those sorts of characters, this was a win, a massive win for the game. And we needed a tight match because the preliminary finals were a bit how you going. And we got that as well. So I think it was the perfect advertisement for the game on one of our biggest stages. I think, I don't know what Peter V'landys does on a Monday after a grand final, but if it's a nice scotch or something like that, I think they've done really well yesterday to advertise us into the future for 2024.
We're going to do so much unpacking of this game today because, first of all, it deserves it. And second of all, we're recording the day after the grand final and hopefully people are listening to it not too far from the recording because it's nice and fresh in our minds. Poor Dean here flew down, went to the game, and has only flown back today. It must have been quite a long flight back today, Dino.
It's been a very crazy 30-odd hours round trip. So, something I had to do. I've been very lucky to attend every Brisbane Bronco grand final, going right back to the 92, 93 glory days, then the 97 Super League era and 98. 2000, 2006, and we've had the unfortunate ones of 2015 and this one, but I'm thrilled to be able to keep the tradition alive to get to every Broncos grand final.
Now, just from a purely entertainment point of view, because I know that either result wasn't good for you, which was a better game, 2015 or 2023?
I think the 2023 felt more like it was more heartbreaking because it was right there in the Broncos' possession. Even though the 2015 was decided, like won in extra time and everything like that, it felt like the Cowboys were getting the momentum and starting to dominate most of that second half, whereas I thought this one goes down as probably the most heartbreaking loss that the Broncos have had grand final-wise.
No, 2015 was because I had 100 on the Broncos to win the comp and would have won 500 that night.
Well, what would you say if I actually had money on the Cowboys?
If you did, then you're not a proper Broncos fan, mate.
I had money on at round one. I was made to make a bet with a few friends, and I said in round one, having no expectations that the Broncos were going to get there, that I thought it would be the Cowboys' year. So while I lost because the Broncos won, I actually cleaned up pretty well on the night.
A win-win situation, but Dean, and what I like about that, I've spoken to a few people about it recently. It's hedging your bets, right? If your team wins, you're happy because it's your team, and if your team loses, then you get a little bit of pocket money.
Yeah, true.
So you're guaranteed to enjoy the result one way or the other, aren't you?
True.
That's,
you could clean up if you're a West Tigers fan or a St George fan. You'd literally just clean up, wouldn't you?
You would if you backed them at the start of the year. That's for sure.
Yeah. Now, Taylor, are you still there? Because your screen's just frozen a little bit.
There you go. There you
are. There you are.
What happened there?
I don't know. You just did.
Anyway,
you look like you were in Madame Tussauds for a moment there. Now, the opening to the game, I've got a theory, mate, that Brisbane lost it in the head, and I think that they made. I'm going to throw this to Taylor first, Dean. They lost it in the head. The error count was just too big. They were trying to score all the time they had the ball. They weren't making any efforts to build pressure. And then the problem with that was that Penrith just held the football. Didn't play anything too sparkling. I thought Penrith were clunky too. I thought their line shots were a bit of a mess. They were flat in attack. But the first 20 minutes, Brisbane did everything they could to lose that grand final, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, they did. You're right, Lee. They had to defend their line multiple occasions. And I guess the spectacle of the grand final and the occasion that it was rose them, and they did a really good job defending. But they were sucking so much juice out of their tank, so much juice. It was just crazy, the amount of juice that was coming out. And Penrith were not as crisp either. They didn't ice any of those opportunities that they should have. But it was still really good viewing. I actually think, regardless of that, you're right, Lee. It sucked a lot of petrol. It did have a detriment to them towards the end of the match. I think that with 20 to go, with the lead they had, they still could have won the game. I think those young players were looking for a leader to stand up and steer them to the premiership. And I think that if you look at head-to-head, Adam Reynolds lost that battle to Nathan Cleary in the last 20 minutes. He really did. You talk about that dropout kick out on the full. That was huge. That was really massive in terms of the game. And I just think that if Adam Reynolds had steered the ship a little better, he could have clawed it back. You're right in saying that they did pretty much lose the game in that opening sort of 20, 25 minutes, but they still were in the fight, being up by that much. With a head like Adam Reynolds, you like to think 99% of teams win that match. And it was just the brilliance of Cleary and Reynolds sort of missing his mark a little bit that wasn't the case.
What kind of game would you have said that, Dean, that Adam Reynolds had?
Yeah, I agree. I think Cleary outplayed Reynolds in the halves. I also think there's something to be said for having a experienced wise guy on the interchange bench. That's one area that I think maybe we've lacked a little bit in the Broncos this year at times, just not having that experienced guy that we can bring on to get a solid 20 minutes or burst out of that's got that knowledge and experience how to control the game in the middle, I'm thinking. So, but yeah, I definitely think if I had to rate Reynolds, I think he was maybe around 6.5 or so in scoring.
I thought he looked his age last night, personally. What we'll do, the last 20 minutes, Nathan Cleary's performance, that has been already covered ad nauseum by every media identity out there, and also everybody chatting in every pub, I think. So we might look at it a slightly different way and talk in detail about the way some of these players played. And we'll start with who I perceive to be the two best on the ground. One from each team, that is. I thought Payne Haas was the best in Brisbane's side. Rate his performance, Taylor.
I thought Payne Haas couldn't have done any more to will the Broncos forward. I thought about this last night, Lee. It was only 12, maybe 16 months ago where we discussed on a previous podcast that Payne Haas was maybe not re-signing. Maybe he was looking towards going to the NFL. And I don't think you may or may not remember this, but he turned around and stayed with the Broncos and stayed loyal. And when asked about it, he said he really believes that this club can win a premiership and he wants to win a comp at the Broncos. And no one at the time thought that was going to be possible in the next 2 to 3 years, considering how they played last year. And he's carried them, the whole forward pack. He's lifted the whole forward pack and carried them to 2 points of a premiership last night. He was just sensational and certainly got a newfound respect of Payne's vision of the game and his belief in his teammates. I thought very much so that he was heading to the NFL. Maybe I had feelings that he might have thought he was a bit bigger than the Broncos in the NRL. But last night he proved that he's just very much a team player. And yeah, I grew a lot of immense respect for Payne Haas last night with his performance. I would say a 9.5 or a 9 for him.
Dean, last week I did a post, and obviously I get abused for it on Facebook, but I firmly believe Payne Haas is firming every year to be one of the best front rowers we've ever seen, if not the. My rationale for that is that he doesn't shirk in defence. Somebody tried to say on Facebook that he shirks in defence. Nothing of the sort. He doesn't do as many front-on tackles as some other people, because I don't think people want to run at him, quite frankly. But he doesn't shirk anything. With the ball, I have never seen a prop forward consistently drive through and dominate the contact line. Like, not just dominate the contact line, but make post-contact meters like he does. I've seen props do that, and I've seen props be very hard to pull down. Glenn Lazarus, Shane Webke, I could keep going on. But I've never seen somebody do it as consistently as Payne has. In the every time he carries the ball, at club football anyway, you know he's going to do damage.
And I think you see that with, sorry, Lee, to cut you off. I think you see that with the second carry, usually Carrigan or somebody after him. Yeah. The amount of defence that Payne draws in gives so much room for the other guys to scoot off and off another carry straight after him.
The other thing that I point to is the amount of 20, 30, 40 metre breaks he makes in games. And then the third thing I use to support this theory is how long he stays on the field for. Like, I mean, to me, is transcending the role.
He's playing. He has transcended the role in the way that he's doing something that no one's ever done. If you want to look at who played the most minutes and who was probably one of the best front rowers we've ever seen in that regard, it was Paul Gallen. Now, Paul Gallen probably wouldn't have made as many run meters in 2 seasons that Payne has in 1. His post-contact meters are just through the roof. You've got a combination of Andrew Fafita and Paul Gallen in the one human, and it is just it's super.
And I'd also argue a little bit of sort of
Tamalolo.
Yeah, but also speed-wise, he's probably throwing an outside back, throwing a bit of mal, in terms of speed with size. Like, I just think we're seeing something special, and I dare say losing that grand final yesterday will actually strengthen his resolve to stay at the Broncos to finish the job. I would have thought.
I believe so too. And look, he was sensational last night, and you'd argue he was probably, he was the best front row on the field, followed very closely by Moses Leota, who had an outstanding game for Penrith. And all of a sudden, you start to look at front row combinations for the end of the year. New Zealand are going to have Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris as their front row pairing. That is just... And then, don't forget Adam Fanua-Blake, who will be in the mix as well. So you're talking...
The problem New Zealand have got, I read this yesterday, is they haven't got Hooker. And Kieran Hooker. Kieran Foran might be playing at Hooker. Apparently you can't get hookers in Auckland.
You can't... None of them.
Dean's smirking. You're rude, Dean. I said we'd talk about the 2 best. So the next one I'm going to put to you, Dean. How good's this Penrith number 7? In the Pantheon.
Absolutely. I think he's definitely pushing the modern day best number 7 that I've seen. I think he's got to have taken that mantle now. I think he's beating Joey Johns, and his stats stack up against anybody in the modern game.
What does he need to do, Taylor, to ice that? I mean, he's already won a couple of Origins. He's been the halfback that's won a World Cup.
Yeah. And this is something you've said a couple of times. We've had this discussion where Cleary hasn't necessarily stood up at Origin level. Well, he has won Origins. He just hasn't done the Thurston or the Cronk, and win those sorts of games, series a couple of years in a row. But none of them won 3 comps in a row. None of them did. And you could argue that last night Cleary single-handedly won them the game with his last 20 minutes. And, he made the line break for the Leota try. He kicked the 40-20 shortly thereafter, which Crichton scored shortly afterwards. And then he scored the final of the game, and he kicked all the goals, which was even more important because they only had a 2-point lead.
And I would argue, Taylor, or Dean, whoever comes in first, getting the job done last night like he did in the last 20 minutes in a grand final is arguably tougher than having to do it in the last 20 minutes of Origin 3 in a decider. Because although in Origin you might have all the best players on the field, some of those players might be in for virtue of their offense being so good compared to their defense. Secondly, the amount of combination and togetherness a defense has by the time they've got to a grand final, to be able to kick a 40-20 that splits open the back three, to make that break that he did when he ran on a 45-degree angle and put Moses Leota through, to run back against the grain to score his try. I think it's possibly harder to do that in the last 20 minutes of a grand final, because you've got to remember the amount of Origin caliber players on both sides, international players, and the stakes. I think it's arguably tougher.
Well, my point to that would also be that we have to remember that Penrith's number 6 also went off as well around that stage. So, from a Broncos perspective, it should have been a no-brainer that all the plays were going to go to Cleary. And he was going to be driving it because he was the only one, especially then when Isaiah Yeo also went off for a HIA there late in the second half. So from a Broncos perspective, obviously you can't just focus solely on one person because there's 13 others on the field, but it should have been a no-brainer.
12 others, Dino.
12 others, that's correct. Well, the referee,
It's been a long day for him. Been a long day.
Stop it, turn it up. But I agree.
But it should have been obvious, and yet Cleary still dominated and couldn't be controlled. So you've got to give it to him for that.
Does that speak to Broncos youth there, not picking that up in the middle of the game, Taylor, with 20 minutes to go? Like lack of an old head saying we need to keep twice an eye on Cleary.
And that's what I mean about probably missing someone to just show them the right direction there and really push them forward. If you look back at Cleary's try, they were caught napping on the inside, the Broncos. They're on their try line defending in the lead of a grand final.
They were knackered.
They were caught napping.
Yeah.
And they were knackered, but they didn't have the old head that just,
That's what grand finals are about. That's what final second.
And some of the errors they made in that last 20 minutes were just because they were cream crackered.
Yeah, I agree. I really
agree. We've taken the two who I perceive to be the two best anyway. Let's go 1 to 17 now and talk about the performances of each. We'll go with the vanquished first each time and go to the victor second. Reece Walsh.
I actually only rate Reece a 6 or a 5.5 for his performance last night. He was caught napping for the Cleary try at the very end. He was out of position for the 40-20. He had a couple of costly errors. I just think that he did try to create a few things. He was involved where he needed to be, but and this is, I think last night we saw a strong argument why James Tedesco truly is the best fullback in the world. There were a couple of costly
on both counts, Edwards and Tedesco. Edwards and Walsh.
Yeah, because positionally, he was left lacking last night, Reece Walsh, and it did cost them points. So I would give him a 5.5. There were some flashes of brilliance. But he also made some pretty poor attempts at cover tackle for 2 of the Penrith tries where he actually overran the tackle. So, 5.5.
I actually thought last night he played like somebody who didn't look like a first grader. He played like one of those players that's just been given his second or third NRL game, and the sort of bob between the grades. He's going to be an outstanding talent, but just his error count and just so many little errors too. Dean, I thought Taylor did an excellent response to that question. Have you got anything to add there?
I agree wholeheartedly, yep.
Because if not, what I'll do is I'll throw you Dylan Edwards to start.
Dylan Edwards, I thought he played a really good hand. A few times there he was struggling when the Broncos had the momentum, but I think that was Penrith as a whole were sort of struggling to contain Ezra there when they were running down that side, carving them up. And I thought Dylan played a really good game. I'd be putting him probably around the 7. It wasn't his best game, but it was definitely one of his usual consistent games, I thought.
I don't think he was that dynamic. He sort of ran like a prop most of the time, I thought, back at the line. But I'll tell you what came to my mind, Taylor, during the game. It just seemed like Reynolds and whoever else was kicking the ball seemed to be kicking right down his throat. And he was catching the ball. The ball was swirling. It was going over the roof and coming down in that wind. And he seemed to be catching it with one finger. He was gobbling them up. No problem.
He was good. And I actually noticed Reece Walsh did a lot of kicking last night. And traditionally that would be Adam Reynolds and Ezra Mann with a lot of short play, but Walsh did interject himself with a lot of long kicking, which makes me think that Reynolds was really carrying a couple of injuries coming into the game if they had put that on Walsh. But you're right, Lee. The biggest thing that sticks to my mind is the in and away by Ezra Mann on Dylan Edwards. It wasn't outstanding. It wasn't great, but, at the end of the game they won. But if Brisbane pulled the win last night, I think Dylan Edwards probably gets a 5 rating. The fact that they got the win probably gets him a 6.5. But
strange, isn't it? Yeah,
it is strange. It's probably how you would look at it. But
even during the game, I was looking at some of the Penrith players, thinking they're not as good 1-17 as Brisbane are. But they're a better unit. They're just a machine-like unit.
And with Yo off the field, with Luai off the field, you thought they'd lose much. I thought Cogger was great off the bench, but you're right. Brisbane did look like more of a team per se.
Let's look at the wings. Sunia Turuva and Brian Toto from Penrith, Jesse Arthurs and Selwyn Cobbo for Brisbane. Taylor, you go again.
The wingers for Brisbane were a bit like, Jekyll and Hyde. Jesse Arthurs has never played a game of football so good in his life. He was outstanding on the wing, wasn't he? Like he made several breaks off just one off the ruck after a kick return. And there was one sequence of play. He had a really good kick return. He had made about 10 post contacts. Then someone else took a hit up, and then he took another hit up and made about a 40-metre break. And I thought, I watched the game and thought, Brisbane, he has been playing good football, but Brisbane have really gambled on him and gotten rid of Corey Oates, who's a fan favourite, has played for Queensland and won Origins and all those sorts of things. Played for Australia, I believe, Corey Oates. And they gambled on Jesse Arthurs, and didn't he repay the faith last night? He was brilliant. I thought he was probably the best winger on the field for mine. And I'm giving him a 9.5. And unfortunately for the winger on the other side, which was Selwyn Cobbo, he didn't really have a great game at all. There was a lot of errors in his game, particularly early in that first half where he was in his own end, and he just the ball just sort of went out of his hands and went out. And I don't know how it even happened, but he didn't have a great game, Selwyn. I think if he had his time over, there's a lot of things he'd change, but he's very young. And I think next year he'll be playing in the centres. So, yeah, look, he only gets a 5.
Dean, anything to add to the Brisbane wings? If not, go with the Penrith ones.
Yeah, no, I think it wasn't a game for the wingers to do anything exceptional. I think we all expected it to be played up the middle through the forwards and on the edges there. And so, yeah, I agree. I think Jesse really injected himself very, very well. Selwyn definitely could have gone looking for the ball. And I thought same with Penrith. I thought To'o was kept pretty quiet and out of the game, and Turuva injected himself really well and looked to try to defensively muscle up and shut the Broncos down, but also inject himself wherever he could.
What talking about these guys has reminded me, we've got another visitor. I'll intro him in a minute, but what talking about these guys on the wingers reminded me too is that even though Brisbane were under the pump in the first half and dropping everything, it was they who made the breaks, wasn't it? It was they who put the slice through the Penrith defence. You just knew they were going to come. If they could hold it together, they were gonna come strong. We've just got the elder statesman Chris Bugden about to join us, but he's just tuning in right now. I'll introduce him after we've talked about the centres. Poor Dean's ended up talking about more Penrith players than Broncos players, so I'm going to throw to Dean now. Katoni Staggs and R. Irby, Dean.
Yeah, I thought both of them played really good. There was a few mistakes and drop ball and sort of positional missed tackles, I guess. But I thought they both tried to inject themselves really well. I still would have to rate them. I think Herbie probably gets a 6.5 or so, and Katoni probably around a 5.5. I think he could have. He made a couple of mistakes and just didn't quite inject himself as much as I was expecting, even though a few of the half breaks and line breaks looked promising, but it just didn't seem to happen for the centres, I thought.
Taylor, where do you stand on the bat down from the dropout? Was Herbie silly to bat it down, or was Ezra Mam silly not to be in position and expect the bat down?
I think probably a couple of Broncos players were a bit silly to not be in a position. I mean, if I was Adam Reynolds, as soon as you'd kicked it, you'd be fishing over that way. Fullback Reece Walsh, where was he? Anyway, that
Ezra Mam just had a snooze at that point.
He did, yeah, and it was they clocked off, and you can't do that in grand finals. And if you actually look at Mitch Kenny, he started going forward. He was anticipating it, and no one else was. So he reaps the rewards there, Mitch. But yeah, I actually thought Herbie and Katoni in that 20-minute period where Broncos got on top, they were very much influencing that. They had some really good, strong touches. But outside that, it wasn't their best game of football. Notably, the big Herbie Farnworth miss on Crichton for that try. Crichton probably had 10 metres to run in, and he kept running forward and forward and forward, and Herbie just he didn't have an answer. He tried to legs him really late, and it just wasn't enough. There was not much room for Crichton to go through, and there was plenty of space, but it was a bad one-on-one miss by Herbie, which really hurt momentum. So, yeah,
can you talk to us about the Penrith centres when you're ready too, mate?
Yeah,
I don't know what Chris is doing.
Gee, Stephen Crichton's going to be missed at the Panthers.
I can hear you, mate. Yeah.
I'm on the phone this time instead of the iPad.
So all right, sorry. I'll bring you in a minute, Chris. Sorry.
I thought Stephen Crichton's going to be a very missed individual, isn't he? Definitely. He's going to be very, very missed when he goes to the Bulldogs. And actually, Isaac Tango didn't really have a good game of football at all. He was involved in 3 bad misses on Ezra Mann, which was defensively with Cleary, who had a touch in him as well. So, yeah, Tango wasn't great. I'm going to give him a 5 in a winning grand final side, but Crichton was sensational. So he gets a 9 or an 8.5.
You've just joined us, Chris Bugden, at the point where we're sort of going through the 17s and we're talking about the performance of each player. I hope you're well, by the way, mate. Yeah, just give us your thoughts on the way Ezra Mann played, because we're just up to the 5-8 now.
I thought he had a sensational 15 minutes or so. And he wasn't necessarily bad in the other part of it, but for about, what did they say, 11 minutes or 12 minutes, he just seemed like he owned the game. And I did not think that anyone was going to come from behind and take the Clive Churchill medal off him at that point. I really thought he had it sewn up. I thought the Broncos had the game sewn up. And that 10 minutes. And I think, and to further your point, Taylor, I got the impression that the Panthers overcompensated a little bit, and they were scared that they were going to get beaten on the outside shoulder a little bit too much, and overcompensated and jammed in a little bit, and the footwork got them because they weren't as relaxed and reliant on their systems and letting the players come to them a little bit more. So, yeah, I think Ezra Mann was outstanding, don't get me wrong, but if he can be outstanding for longer periods of a game, who knows what he can do.
Jerome Luai, Dean?
Luai, I thought he was struggling with the shoulder. So, I actually, sitting in the stadium, I actually didn't notice him hardly at all on the field. And when he only really noticed him when he big screen showed that he was off on the sideline, and all the crowd definitely made sure they let their feelings heard whenever he was on the big screen. But yeah, I thought he had a pretty quiet game and was hardly spotted from my perspective sitting in the field watching.
I've worked out what I'm going to do for most of the positions now. I'm going to throw one to Chris for the other 2 to add to, and then 1 to Taylor for the other 2 to add to, and then 1 to... That's how I'll do it, right? We've already covered the halfbacks, really, Reynolds and Nathan Cleary. So we're going to go to the front row. And I think the front row, we'll just go with the starters for now. So Moses Leota, James Fisher-Harris for Penrith, and Flegler and Haas I think Haas we've covered in some detail, obviously, for the Broncos. But let's go to one of the finest front rowers ever to live in Dayborough, Taylor Brown, to tell us what he thinks.
I thought we've covered Haas. He was sensational. Flegler, he was very good. He was a little bit quiet, but I don't think that was because he had a bad game. I just think he was overshone by the other three starting front rowers who were sensational. I think that we've covered Haas, but Leota and Fisher Harris are they're the best starting front row combination in the competition by far. The way they work off each other, and they're just menacing, aren't they? They don't have a back foot step in them, and Leota had a few really tough carries. That one on Carrigan stands out in the forefront of your mind when you think about the game. And I just they really were good. During the week, they come out and said they were going to bash Payne Haas. They did try, but Payne Haas still got the better of them, I think, on the night.
Oh, he didn't look like a bash front rower to me, apart from his own exertions, you know?
Yes, but they were still great nonetheless. I'm giving both of them. I'm giving Fisher Harris an 8 and Leota a 9.
Do you want to add anything, you boys?
From my perspective, I just thought I couldn't believe how I think nearly every time both Fisher Harris and Leota were getting tackled, finding the front and getting what I thought were quick play the balls happening. They definitely had the forward momentum in just about all the tackles. I can't recall any time the Broncos sort of dominated them in a tackle and got them on their back to have a slow play the ball. They were exceptional, I thought.
You told me a statistic, didn't you, off air, if you like, Dean, about play the ball speed. Do you want to go through that now with these great minds here?
Well, when I was at the game, it felt like the Broncos were struggling to get up and get the quick play the ball happening. So as soon as I got home today, first thing I did was fire up the computer and checked out the stats, and it was all basically even. Penrith average play the ball was 3.38 seconds, and the Broncos was 3.39 seconds, I think, if my memory serves. So the play the ball speeds were very even. The only thing I really noticed was Penrith in their first and second tackle seemed to be able to slow the Broncos down just a fraction. I'm not saying there was any foul play or anything. It was just tactically being able to work them over well and get the Broncos on their back, or just a slightly slower play the ball, which I thought was huge to get Penrith's defensive line set for the rest of the set then. And it just felt that Penrith were getting us being the Broncos. I keep saying us because of my links to the Broncos, but it just felt like the Broncos were struggling to get the quick play the ball and get the momentum happening, at least in the first half, from what I could see.
Statistically, tackle 2 is the most important. So if you get number 2 right, the rest of your set is good in attack.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so that'd be why there was so much focus on that from, I suppose, Penrith. Chris, can you tell us what you thought of the second rowers, please? Kurt Capel, Jordan Ricky from Brisbane, and Liam Martin and Scott Sorensen from Penrith.
Yeah, can I just add to that point, Dean made? I think it was the crucial tackles that Penrith seemed to win, and I think they what I noticed, especially early in the game in the first half, is that the Panthers were attacking at scrum lines and tram lines rather than going actually through the middle third so much. So I think that's where they got a bit of their momentum. And the stats did, on the stats sheet, you would have thought Penrith won by 20 points.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the second rowers, yeah, Liam Martin, I loved his aggression, especially early in the game. He was hitting like a Mack truck. The others, I don't know that the other 3 second rowers came into the game as much as they could, but the Broncos were playing out the back a lot and were using their speed. So in attack, Ricky and sorry, who's the left second rower for Broncos again?
Capewell.
Didn't get a whole lot in attack, but they're pretty sound defensively, I suppose.
Capewell fell off about 6 tackles. He was hideous on passive tackles.
Right. Okay. I didn't notice that as much.
Yeah. It's been thrown about a bit today in certain things. Did you notice that, Taylor?
I do.
I thought he was terrible, mate. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. That's really mean. But they're out there to be judged, aren't they? Just poor misses. And that one-on-one with Cleary was really noticeably bad to pull the odor away. And that was a crucial turning point. Really poor one-on-one misses from Catewell. I thought Ricky tried hard consistently as well, but also didn't fail to have the impact that he has previously. I thought both back rowers for Penrith were very, very good, but I just think they missed the mark in the maroon and gold colours last night. Very much so.
Do you think, Dean, that the Penrith second row was better than the Brisbane second row last night?
Yeah, I would have to give it to Penrith. I thought Martin went out with the game plan to try to. The Broncos were always going to play an expansive style, trying to spread it, and Martin definitely went out with the game plan to try to smash us from the side on and cut that down as much as possible, and defensively really jam in and try to hurt the Broncos. I thought so. He executed the game plan really, really well. And that first half, he was putting some massive hits on. And like you said, I think the Broncos' second row kind of went missing in crucial stages and made some very, very telling errors in the end. So, yeah, credit goes to Penrith. They get the points on that.
The block forwards, Isaiah Yeo and Pat Carrigan, that's you, Dino?
Yeah, I thought they both even themselves out. I think Carrigan probably gets the win for the work rate that he did up the middle, and he was exceptional, which you come to expect from Carrigan. Isaiah Yeo was kind of on the quiet side for him, I thought. I didn't notice him play the ball and getting the offloads. Defensively, I think he did a fair bit more work than normal, but he wasn't as noticeable when Penrith were attacking the line. So I'd give Carrigan the win in that head-to-head battle.
Anyone else want to add to that?
How did he pass his HIA? I'd like to know.
Who's that?
Isaiah Yeo. I know there's no real conclusive test, but gosh, that surprised me that he passed his HIA.
Yeah. I think if you pass it regardless of the knock.
Yeah. I know, and that's why I said there's no hard and fast test that is conclusive. But yeah, I
thought the HIA was getting used quite tactically last night too.
I actually think that a lot of the rules that we have known to expect in 2023 went out the window last night, and it was a beautifully refereed game.
It was.
Adam G did a really good job, but a lot of those accidental contacts with the head, I've seen 10 in the bin throughout the year for some of those.
It should have been a 6 again fest last night.
Yeah, it should have been, but the game flowed a little more and it was better. And you have to ask the question: if they don't want to blow it in a grand final, why are they blowing it throughout the season? And that has to be something that is discussed in the postseason review of the NRL. Is consistency towards the management of the game in terms of a referee and officiating stance.
I'm going to do the hookers a little bit differently. That's why I left them out.
You always do.
No comment, Taylor. Billy Walters and Tyson Smoothie I'm going to pool together and talk about and throw it to you. When Billy Walters was off the field, Broncos scored all their points. Tyson Smoothie came up with better delivery, was more of a threat. At halftime, close to halftime, Billy Walters looked like he played 20 games. Apart from that 40-20, I've wondered why Billy Walters was the starting hooker at Brisbane this year. I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I have long thought that Tyson Smoothie will eventually overtake him. And I think with Blake Moser coming through the ranks, I think Smoothie wins that spot. The problem with Walters is he is he has a high utility value, meaning he can play in the halves, which Smoothie we haven't necessarily seen do that at NRL level. Pakes we have, but I think he misses out to all of those guys indefinitely. Tyson Smoothie is an absolute quality hooker. I think if given the opportunity to have a full-time hooking role, he could grow to be one of the best hookers in the game. He's an absolute standout in my eyes. the way he had the confidence to run on the last tackle, shape to kick and throw that short ball to Flegler for that try, really impressed me. And I watched that at the time. And the way he held the ball in his hands as if he was to kick actually forced Penrith to sit on their heels on the line. And as soon as they sat on these heels, he accelerated further, which drew them into himself. And then he got the offload to Flegler away. It was, he tactically moved he made his moves very consciously there, and it paid off for him and for the Broncos. I think Tyson Smoothie's definitely the answer going forward for Brisbane. What that means for Walters, I don't know, but I'm not the head coach. I'm just letting you know that I think Smoothie's a better player.
Mitch Kenny, Chris?
Can I just ask, who played more minutes out of Smoothie and Walters last night? Because Walters didn't play as many minutes as he normally does.
They used them very differently, didn't they, Chris? That's another very good point. He come on a lot earlier and he stayed on the field for a lot longer, Smoothie.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if Billy came off so early. I thought he might have had a knock or something.
Yeah. Yep.
Chris, stop making this podcast longer. You joined us with 20 minutes to go and you keep making it longer with extra questions. I'm
trying to catch up. Mitch Kenny, as I get, he's a traditional workman-like hooker, I think, Mitch Kenny. He's got a little deception in his game. He's a fantastic defender. And that effort play, I mean, like you guys all said when I just jumped on, him to be in position for the Herbie Farnworth back, you'd swear they've practiced it week in, week out between the two of them. And I guess the best testament for Mitch Kenny came, I think it was Cleary. I'm not sure. One of the boys at the end of it just said that, in effort areas, he wins everything at training. And that, I think, is great. Well, I couldn't believe when I read the paper today that he's played 80-odd games of NRL. I'd almost have to question that statistic because he must have played a lot off the bench under Appy. But, he was just – I've always thought, in a lot of ways, a good hooker isn't noticed too much in a rugby league game unless you specifically watch him. And Mitch Kenny was kind of there going under the radar and just doing his job and allowing those middles and the halves.
He's another one that I read today. He fell off a few tackles as well. That's something I didn't notice in the game. Now, boys,
that was a pretty fast game, though. I wouldn't be surprised if the number of missed tackles was higher than average in that game. It was a rocket-paced game.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mitch Kenny, though. I really, really do like Mitch Kenny and the way he plays football. He's just so solid, isn't he? And the way that he positioned himself for that try, he's obviously studies and does his tape and knows where to be as well, which is another doesn't shock me considering the way he plays football is just all effort. I really, really like Mitch Kenny as a footballer. And he's just another one of those, he's a real testament to the Penrith system. If you look at, they lost Api Coruscant last year and they lost Viliami Kikau. And Kenny, who was on the bench last year, and Sorensen, who was on the bench, both just put their hands up, filled those positions, and played really, really well throughout 2023. And they've won another competition. You're already starting to say, what do they do without Spencer Leniu and what do they do without Stephen Crichton? I can almost guarantee you they have something up their sleeve because they really do treat it almost like Queensland do in Origin. Next man up, back him to the hilt, and he'll do a job for us. It's proven that it's worked in the last 3 seasons for them. And, I'm looking forward to it, how that plays out.
Not got time to go through the subs, so apologies to all subs, and hopefully a little bit's come out about some of them while we've been talking. Because what I want to talk about now briefly is the fact that there was 3 grand finals yesterday, including Queensland teams, and they didn't win one of them, Taylor.
Yeah, they didn't win any of them, which is unfortunate for the Queenslander teams. I think for the NRLW, the Titans being in the grand final was great. I mean, the Knights are such a juggernaut in that competition, aren't they? And the Panthers are such a juggernaut. The only real comparison that you can put between New South Wales and Queensland on grand final day is the state championship. And it's becoming a little bit of a farce in a way that we cannot get a win over the top of the New South Wales counterparts. I say we because I played all of my senior football here in Queensland. So as much as I'm a New South Wales Blue, I'm very much a supporter of this system, and I'm very much I hedge my bets, and this is where I do all my commentary work. So I want to back it. We can't get it done. We had an extra week this year where we could drink as much as we'd like the first week to celebrate a grand final, and then do all the rehab in the world and come back against the Southsides who were taken all the way by the Bears in that New South Wales Cup grand final, and we still couldn't get it. It was chalk and cheese. there's a lot to be said about having a lot, more full-timers in the squads in New South Wales. There's a lot to be said about the strength of competition week in, week out. There's a lot to be said of the structure they have in New South Wales and what we are lacking here in Queensland. I think we need to adapt. Because honestly, at this rate, the best thing for Queensland Cup to do would be just not be involved next year, because we haven't won one since the Jets in 2015. And even then, the Jets had that unorthodox style play, didn't they? So it was hard for Newcastle to get the wood over. It wasn't a traditional sort of matchup for the New South Wales side. So, look, there's certainly trouble in paradise, and if you are ignoring that, the Wolves are at the door.
It's a metaphor, mate. The Jets, what they did in 2015, you've got to think outside the square to win. So, mate, your old coach Adam Mogg did a Facebook post on the 28th of September 2022, and I assume it was in a similar circumstance that the state final had ended in the wrong way. I'm going to read it out in its entirety and throw it open to all three of you. Rugby League in Queensland. So this is a Queensland Cup coach of many years. I love the game and I love the pathway of Queensland Cup. I have a massive concern that the required level is falling well short of NRL standards. Here lies my concern. The standard has dropped over the last 4 seasons. It has, and I'm qualified to say this. 6 years coaching the Dolphins and 1 year coaching the Sunshine Coast Sea Eagles post the NRL Manly Seagulls affiliation. I have been part of the system as a 7-year coach and 5 years as a player. This isn't about grand finals. It's about my concern how far away the game is from NRL. NRL teams in Queensland used to have reserve grade teams in the Queensland Cup. North had Storm, Cowboys had Townsville Stingers, Broncos had Toowoomba. They were all great teams and better than anyone on their day. But none of those teams dominated the competition because other teams were strong. Dolphins, Wynnum, Burleigh, Souths. The comp was strong at any given day. Future NRL players were playing. The NRL supports the Queensland Cup and New South Wales RL statewide competitions by way of salary cap grants. Here is my concern. The game can financially afford to fund the reserve grade teams. He's got some spelling mistakes in. He was making it hard for me to read. Fund a reserve grade team in each NRL club. Each NRL club only needs to sign 10 more full-time players, and the grants going to statewide teams can pay players to be full-time. Add this to the TV rights to offer a better standard of reserve grade competition, and now every NRL club has its own reserve grade team, and it would make a profit, whereas currently it loses money. So the solution, in his view, when it comes down, he says rugby league fans are passionate and know the game really well. They know a quality game when they watch it. 500 fans watching statewide competitions doesn't pay the bills. It's simply not enough. The solution, in my view, less teams in Queensland Cup, consolidate the teams, pay the players more, double the salary cap to be in line with New South Wales, make all coaches full-time, let Queensland Cup teams control their own reserve grade team in the BRL or equivalent. BRL needs to be run by Queensland Cup sides. Consolidate junior statewide competitions into BRL run teams and let the kids play full seasons, under 18s or under 20s. Scrap under 21s, which has since been done. Good kids at 21 will play Q Cup or BRL against men. Bring back regional rep sides, Sunshine Coast, Wide Bay, etc. Invest more money into junior football clubs and schools. That's his 2 cents. He suggested them to the QRL for some seasons. It's a concern, and the guy running the entire game, in my opinion, is smart, and he has the ear of smart guys like Gus Gould, who I respect massively, and who built the Panthers system. They all know what creates a better product at the top end. He wrote this prior to the North Devils playing last year. Can you remember that result last year, Taylor?
Yeah, the Devils didn't win. I can't remember by what, but I don't think it was very close.
I'll look that up while you share your thoughts on the whole thing.
Look, my mate Moggy coached me, and I certainly have a lot of respect for his views within the rugby league world, and I know he respects mine. He still calls me occasionally from time to time. We do discuss these things, and I agree with him. I agree that we are slipping behind as a state when it comes to our statewide competition. And I have said for many years that when we put a salary cap in, of 500,000 to New South Wales Cup's 750,000, we had individual play caps of 40,000. They did not, meaning that they had 10 players they would get back from NRL each week, plus they could spend whatever they wanted on any other players in their squad to get up to that $750,000 mark with no individual cap. You're going to produce better squads. I mean, it just makes sense. You could go to a New South Wales Cup team and still get paid 80 grand if you were good enough. And if they wanted to spend it on you, you could be full time. In Queensland, that was never possible when the salary cap come in. Since then, the salary cap's now been halved again. So we're playing on a salary cap of 300,000 at the moment, I believe, in Queensland, unless that's changed and someone hasn't let me know. 300,000. Double and a half is what New South Wales Cup are playing with. You tell me what's the smart decision as a footballer where you're going to go and play your trade. Mm-hmm. You tell me where you're going to get more exposure.
Plus, on top of that, Taylor, because of the NYC being scrapped, if you're a kid looking for somewhere to go, you're going to go to Sydney because you're either going to get better money or picked up by an NRL club or playing their feeder systems.
You have a stronger exposure to NRL when you are in Sydney. That's a fact. So until they can make it more lucrative to come to Queensland and play rugby league here, they're going to lose their talent down south. That's where they will play. And that's why they will have stronger competition week in, week out. And that's why they will beat us on the day of days when it comes to these competitions if we continue down this path. Now, I know many, many players that go out west to Toowoomba, go down to Gold Coast, go down to Newcastle, go up to Sunny Coast, all these other places where you can play football to get paid better money that you do in Host Plus Cup anyway. So that's a big, big question mark. We need to pay our players what they're worth if we want to see them week in, week out. I went and watched a game of football this year that was senior level in Queensland, and there was a juniors game on before it in A grade. After the juniors game, it cleared out quick. No one stuck around to watch. We need to start asking the question why that's happening and fix that problem. Because if you can't get people to watch our sport, Adam's right. You are losing revenue week in, week out.
Do you watch much of it, Chris Bugden, the QRL Queensland Cup?
I have in the past. I haven't too much this year, but I want to add a couple of points to what Taylor said. I think in the regional area, there's some positives in the Q Cup. It's a statewide competition. You can, teams are coming from Port Moresby down to Tweed Heads and out to Toowoomba. New South Wales Cup doesn't have that. It's a very Sydney-centric, Newcastle, Wollongong out to Canberra. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad necessarily either way. I'm just saying that they're different competitions, and I'd hesitate to put too much emphasis on the winner of the game yesterday as any indicator, or as too big of an indicator, because if Queensland Rugby League's doing so poorly, how can their Origin team keeps winning consistently?
Well, yeah, that's There's another stat, isn't there, that Queensland have dominated Origin. But to your point right now, because this is going to open up a really enthralling debate. These are the results of the last 10 years of the state championship, Chris. Are you ready? 2014.
Yeah, I know they're not good for Queensland.
2014, Northern Pride 32, Penrith 28. 2015, the Jets 26, Newcastle 12. 2016, Illawarra Cutters 54, Burleigh 12. Penrith 42, PNG 18. Canterbury 42, Redcliffe 18. I mean, these aren't close, are they? The next close one was 2019, Newtown Jets 20, Burleigh 16. And what I find interesting there, it's the first time that a non-NRL club had played in that game. Oh, Illawarra Cutters, sorry, but they're absolutely, completely part of a merged identity. The match was cancelled for 2 years because of the Rona. And then in 2022, Penrith won 44-10 against North Devils, and we know what happened yesterday. So the question I'm throwing back to you, Chris, is, like you just said, surely the ultimate job of the QRL is to win Origin. But when is this going to be? When are they going to catch up to each other, in the sense that if we have 10 more years of this, will those Queensland Origin wins start to dry up?
I'd ask a different question, Lee. How many teams enter the or start a season wanting to win that game? I think they want to win their own comp first, and if they get that, then the game yesterday, the national championship or whatever it's called, becomes probably an additional goal at the end of it. But
Chris, I remember speaking about that day one of preseason with Adam Mogg for 6 years. saying, and we sat there. We did goal sessions at the start, and I clearly remember Moggy every year saying, "We're winning the comp, and we're going to win that thing as well, and we want that."
So it's part, yeah. That. So you're countering what Chris said, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what are the players thinking, though, Taylor? Were the players buying into that?
Absolutely.
Why would you not want to win a national title, Chris?
In 2016, when we lost to Burleigh, I remember watching Burleigh play against Illawarra being absolutely filthy, knowing that they'd been on the drink for 4 days and then went down there and did that. And I remember.
So, how much video analysis did Moggy do of the New South Wales teams throughout the season?
Well, you don't need to do it until you verse them, right? Is what I'm saying.
And there's my point. You prepare for it for a week.
Well, so do the New South Wales side.
So do they. And my thing is, Chris, we spoke about how we were like, that's the next job. That's what we're going to do. And we were fully prepared to, yes, celebrate that victory if we won the Q Cup. Sure, there would have been beers that night, but I guarantee you we would have been in bed at it wouldn't have been like we won a grand final just yet, because I wanted to go there and win that thing. And in 2018, when the Redcliffe Dolphins did win the comp, even though I wasn't a part of the team, I know for a fact they all rocked up to training on the Monday.
So my point is, with the evidence we've got now of 10 years worth, 9 and 10 years ago, they were competitive. Whether they won or lost, they were competitive. Ever since then, with the exception of 2019, they've been very uncompetitive, which suggests that the tip of this iceberg in Queensland, that's a bit counterintuitive because you probably wouldn't ever get an iceberg in Queensland, but the tip of this one isn't as strong as the tip of the New South Wales one. Now, we all know that Origin is the goal, but ultimately, Origin relies on the players coming through its system. Now, if this is allowed to continue, and don't forget, a lot of these players that play in these systems, they actually come from different places. They come from different states.
Yeah.
Some of them move interstate. Some of them come from New Zealand. And it just makes Sydney a more attractive proposition for these people. And then they qualify for New South Wales, not for Queensland, if that's their first. So we're going to have... And the other thing is, in a development system, if you're coming through a system and not playing a tough amount of football week in, week out, let's say in Queensland, the football's 7 out of 10 intensity, and in Sydney, the equivalent player has got 9 out of 10 intensity, that, if everything's equal, that player in Sydney will come out the system better. And that's my point. Do you get what I mean, Dean?
Absolutely. I think, like, I'm from the country originally, and so the country side of rugby league, I think, has been struggling for a long time with getting the funding and the grassroots behind it there, which has a filtering effect on then into the cities and into the QRL and the BRL competition. Purely from a fan's perspective, like myself, I really always, going back to when the NYC started, I thought personally that was a mistake. I wanted to see a reserve grade competition happening as a curtain raiser to the NRL that I thought had more promise to attract older age groups and keep the older age groups playing on the fringes of NRL, then would filter down into the QRL and into the BRL and then into the regional and so on. So I see there being a whole, or not a wrong perspective in setting up the NYC comp that the National Rugby League did years ago and then subsequently folded. But I think there was sort of a missed opportunity there to really capture the older than 21, let's say. I wouldn't say the older demographic, but at least the sort of the mature age demographic, and get them more engaged into the BRL and creating that whole structure where it filtered right up through to the top.
And then just one thing I want to end with, Taylor. As you know, I like to change the topic for the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
I've got an electric razor, a beard trimmer. And I'm at the stage now where I whack it on the wall to start it. Right, I turn it on, it doesn't come on, and I bang it against the wall, and it starts. And it shakes like an old car kind of thing, but it gets the job done. My question is, Taylor, what bit of equipment do you stick with, even though you should have probably thrown it away ages ago, or have you stuck with for a long time?
Probably my high school rugby league coach.
I thought you were going to say you something else. Equipment that fails you at some point.
Mate, I've still got to bang you against the wall sometimes to get you to work.
And any old cars or anything like that you've
mate, I've got the most beat up old barbecue you've ever seen in your life.
Okay.
And I just keep sticking with it. And the other week I cooked it. My wife's adamant that it's unsafe, and when she hears I'm cooking in it, she actually evacuates the area because she believes that one day it's going to blow up in my face. But I've stuck with it through and through, and it's going to be hard pressed to get rid of it, I think. And needs some running repairs at the moment. There's a bolt missing from the move on the lid handle. There's a few things missing, but it's not getting thrown away. It's a good barbecue.
Chris, you must have a few things from the 1950s that you've just kept using. And
all of them.
No,
all
seriously. You must have.
Make them like they used to.
Because you're the oldest person here. I know I keep joking about it and everything, but you in particular would have come from an era where things were built a bit better and so they lasted a bit longer. So, yeah, what springs to mind when you think of that?
It does frustrate me, Lee. A lot of my gardening stuff. I've got shovels that, I've replaced handles and that several times rather than get a new one because I just don't trust. You go to the big hardware shop that everybody knows, and just about everything you buy it again in 6 weeks' time because you've broken it. So I'd probably stick with the gardening gear.
And Dino?
I'm renowned for repairing technology, computers, mobile phones, tablets. So I'm always tinkering away at a computer that should have been thrown out years and years ago, but I will get it working again for 6 weeks or a month, and then it'll blow up again, and I'll start working through the processes and repairing it all over again. So that's sort of one of my things that I'm renowned for.
Now, my story in addition. My story, in addition to my razor story, because that's quite minor, is the last car I had that I got rid of maybe a year and 2 months ago. Yeah. It was written off by a mechanic in 2015, and he said you need to be getting a new car, and I got rid of it in 2022.
Nice.
And I probably could have got another year out of it, 2 years out of it, 3 years out of it. Because my current mechanic said there was nothing wrong with it. Just a bit bashed around the edges, Bit like Taylor Brown.
Mate, I thought you were going to ask about beard trimmers there, and I was about to tell you got to replace them every 2 years. I got one 2 years ago for Christmas. I just got a new one a couple of weeks ago, the old Virgin 1 Point Rewards. I jumped on just in time, got myself a new trimmer, Viva Saloon.
Great work.
So 1 point, which usually it would cost you about 20,000 points, and it cost me 1 point. Yeah. And I'm really stoked with that. So Virgin's up on my list.
You're right about every 2 years. I don't know why. Why are they so crap?
I don't know. This one seems to be a goal, but we'll see how it goes. I'm going to keep the old one for other purposes. But if you talk about a face trimmer every 2 years.
So Dean, have a good week. Have a good week, mate. I reckon you'll get over the grand final defeat. Probably the next time it happens, you'll get over that one.
That's about right.
I did notice, Dean, your championship trophy there was made out of wood. You're probably better off. You're probably next going to hand a wooden spoon before you touch one of them again, so maybe keep it close.
Hey, we don't mention that with that wooden spoon ever again. That's banned, those two words.
And Chris, even though we didn't see you this time here on this Zoom recording, great to hear from you again. What's your plans and what have you been up to?
Oh, I've had 2 weeks holidays, mate, so I've been kicking back and watching some footy and some other sports, some NFL, and got to go back to work tomorrow, so probably an early night for me.
Bet you can't wait to get back to school tomorrow, eh?
Can't wait, mate. Can't wait. Only 9 weeks to go till my next holiday.
Take care, boys.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.